Late light spills across the trimmed lawn and turns each blade into a sliver of glass. Heat rises from the stone and hangs in the still afternoon like a held breath. On the balcony, Richard rests his palm against the marble column beside him. The stone is cold and certain. It has never moved for anyone. His hand tightens until he can feel the ridge where two blocks meet, a seam pressed into his skin like a quiet warning. Power lives in things that do not shift. He thinks power is a door that opens only for its owner. Then a sound, not made by money, pierces the hush, and the door inside him tilts on its hinges. Beyond the hedge, a boy slips through a low gap where leaves are thin. Bare feet touch grass. Knees are scuffed like coins that have changed too many hands. His shirt hangs crooked on a thin frame, and his hair is a shade lighter where the sun has had its way. The boy glances around as if he has stepped into a museum where laughter is forbidden, then grins and bows to no one at all. His body chooses clumsiness on purpose. An elbow circles too wide. A hip swivels the wrong way. He staggers and almost falls and saves himself at the final instant. With a flourish so ridiculous, it becomes a kind of grace. Amanda watches from her chair near the path. The wheels are canted slightly toward the sun, and her face is turned with practiced caution, as though light itself might hurt. Grief has lent her posture a tired dignity beyond her years. But the boy is stubborn in the way only joy can be stubborn. He tiptoes like a spy who has forgotten how to be quiet. He makes siren sounds without any intention of being accurate. He pretends to argue with the garden and loses the argument loudly. A small sound escapes Amanda. Not a laugh yet, only the throat-clearing of laughter searching for courage. Then the sound becomes what it has been trying to become. It leaps out of her, as if a bird has panicked from a bush and found sky. Richard feels the column under his hand as if it might crack. The cool that once steadied him now feels foreign, like an old habit he must put down. The clap of Amanda's hands lands on stone and water, and him, and the house that has obeyed silence for months hears its exile end. He almost calls down to the guard on the far path. His mouth even shapes the beginning of the command, but habit bends and does not break him. He does something rarer for a man like him. He waits. The boy swallows the approval like food and becomes bolder. He rolls on the grass and pops to his feet and invents an interview with a leaf. He points to the garden camera and crosses his eyes as if the red eye of the lens is a friend who must be teased into joining the game. He bows too low and pretends his back has locked. He attempts a cartwheel that dies halfway, and then applauds his own failure with exaggerated pride. He throws his voice at the sky and catches the echo with both hands. Amanda laughs again, and her chest works between bursts as if laughter were heavy, and she must lift it with effort. The sound is not easy. It is labor. It is a lift, and a catch, and a breath, and another lift. It is survival, wearing delight as a disguise. Richard watches the child he knows better than he knows himself. He measures the tiny changes that would be invisible to a stranger. The soft line at the corner of her mouth loosens by a fraction. The slope of her shoulders alters hardly at all, and yet enough to change the whole shape of her. Her back makes a small decision to resist gravity. Heat paints the top of her cheeks with a quick wash of color, and there, almost dismissed as a trick of light until he refuses to dismiss it, a flicker at the arch of her right foot, the faintest whisper of intention beneath skin that has been too still for too long. He does not trust what he sees. He cannot look away from it. A guard steps into the edge of his vision, careful, waiting, the radio on his belt ready to turn concern into procedure. Richard lifts 2 fingers without looking at the man. It is a quiet order, a private signature he has used in boardrooms, and on tarmacs, and in rooms where deals become facts. Stand down. The gesture says, "Let this be." The guard nods and retreats the length of a single breath. The marble column under Richard's palm is winter. The laughter below is summer. He understands that both live in him, and for the first time in months, he dislikes the one that has kept him upright. His fingers open. He peels his hand from the stone and studies the pale crescent pressed into the center of his palm. The imprint fades almost at once, as if the column refuses to admit it ever held him. He does not return his hand to it. The boy stages a tragedy with a blade of grass. He hides it, loses it, finds it behind his ear, screams at his own success, accuses the grass of mischief, begs forgiveness, and then appoints the blade to a high office. Amanda claps hard enough to make her hands sting and laughs in a new register, lower and truer, the sound a body sometimes makes when it has stopped apologizing. She says again, and the word is not merely a request, it is belief, it is a ritual claiming its hour. Repetition, Richard thinks, is not laziness here. It is a door that has finally learned which way it is supposed to swing. Heat rises from the tile and drifts around his ankles. Somewhere beyond the wall, the water carries wind ashore and drops a thin, cool ribbon through the garden. He tastes cut green on the back of his tongue. He catches a kitchen smell and cannot name it. The ordinary world returns in pieces, as if the garden has been waiting for permission to be ordinary again. A thought climbs to the place where his orders live. This is not free of risk. A boy has entered his property. Protocol is a comfort because it sells the illusion that the worst cannot surprise you if you dress it in uniform. He sees the hole in the hedge. He notes the scuff at the base of the frangipani, where feet have pressed soil. He thinks about the cup of shrine-like quiet he has built for his daughter, and the trespass of anyone who has not been cleared to carry sound across its rim. He makes a ledger in his head. On one side he writes danger and image and control. On the other, he writes the laugh he is hearing, and the small, defiant change in her posture, and the brief flicker beneath the arch of her right foot that may be his imagination and may be a prophecy. He has spent the years spending money to become master of odd. He understands that this ledger will not obey those sums. He closes it. The boy fails beautifully again. He acts surprised at the breeze and bows to it and steps aside to let the wind perform. When the wind refuses art, he gives the stage a pity dance, a crooked kick that shames gravity into clapping. He tumbles and rises and tumbles again, and pretends he does not know how he is doing any of this. He is not performing for a patron. He is performing for a girl who has not been asked to spend her joy wisely for a very long time. She says again, and the word lands on Richard like a hand he has not felt since the house was filled with a different kind of light. He recognizes the old reflex standing behind him in the shadow. Call, contain, correct. You can end this before something ends you. He does not turn to greet the reflex. He lets the sound below argue its case. It argues with no words at all, and wins by placing a warmth inside his chest, where cold has lived without rent. Amanda coughs once and steadies herself. The nanny steps from the shade with a bottle. Amanda sips and breathes and grins above the straw as if even drinking is a joke today. The boy pretends to drown in a spoonful of water and then coughs himself alive again with a flourish that announces he has mastered the art of survival on less than anyone would call enough. Amanda claps softly and finds a new breath. The boy listens to her breathing like a musician listens for tempo. He waits for her to choose the next moment. She chooses with a tiny nod. He obeys. Richard inventories, the feeling moving through him with the caution of a man who has been punished for optimism. He has seen hope spoken in polite letters on expensive paper. He has watched it wash off tile and disappear down drain. This feels different because it does not ask him to sign anything. It does not ask him to perform wealth or strength. It asks him to do the hardest thing a man like him can do. It asks him to let a moment be itself without issuing an order to improve it. He holds his position in the shade and hears his own house make a new sound out of an old air. He can taste his limits as clearly as salt. He does not hate them the way he usually does. The column is still there to his left, cold and unbending, the monument of a life built to win. He can stand without it for a while. He will not pretend the stone is not his. He will not pretend the warmth below is his either. He will be a witness, which is a different kind of power and, perhaps, a truer one. The boy trips over a line that does not exist and blames the line. He drags himself by his elbows across an invisible border and leaps up in triumph. Amanda throws her head back for the first time in too long, and the sun catches the soft fuzz at her hairline and turns it to a brief halo. She says again and again and again, each time with more ownership, as if the point of the world is practice, and the world has finally agreed. Richard understands that a promise has been made, and that he is part of it, even if he has not spoken. He will choose how to honor that promise later. Rules can be written, terms can be set, conditions can protect what matters. But this moment is not a contract, it is a living thing. He lets it breathe, then breathe again. He glances once toward the path. The guard has not moved. Good. The radio remains quiet. Good. Control has not left the premises. It has simply been asked to take its hand off the throat of the afternoon. The laughter slows by a measure, then swells again as the boy discovers that hiding nothing and pretending to find it is endlessly funny, if done with enough sincerity. Amanda rides the wave of sound, and when she needs air, she takes it with a small gasp that is half effort and half victory. Her hands meet in a clap that sounds stronger than the one before. The posture of her back keeps the small decision it made a few breaths ago. Richard lets the column be cold beside him, and lets the garden be warm below him, and accepts that both truths can stay for now. He will decide later what to do with hedges and holes and guards and gates. He will decide later how to make sense of that almost invisible flicker beneath the arch of her right foot. He will decide later what to call the thing that has returned to his house. For this breath and the one after it, he chooses to hear. He does not call the guards. He does not correct the world for being unscheduled. He watches his daughter laugh and steps back into the shadow, not in retreat, but in consent. He yields the stage to the foolish boy, and to the heat, and to the cooling breeze, and to the sound that has made a room inside his chest. In that small, unannounced yielding, he offers the first term of a future agreement. He will set the rules tomorrow. Today he will stand down. Heat still wavered above the lawn, as if the afternoon had not yet chosen between staying and leaving. Laughter drained into softer sound, the hush after a bright bell, the creak of leaves, the breath of a child catching up. From the balcony, the marble column waited the way. Old rules wait, unbending, prepared to be leaned upon. Richard left it where it stood. He placed his palm on the warm railing instead, and descended the stone steps into the air that smelled of cut green and a thin thread of salt drifting in from the water beyond the wall. Amanda's chair faced the spread of grass at a small angle, as if her body had turned itself toward possibility without asking permission. Pink lingered in her cheeks like a quick confession. She touched the armrest with 2 fingers, a cautious tap to confirm both chair and self were still real. The boy stood near the shadow of the hedge, a thin frame stitched together by stubborn spark, Up close he looked younger and tougher than he had from above, all knobby knees and patched scrapes, a shirt a size too large, dirt banding his ankles in the honest pattern of a day that had not been kind. The guard on the path watched with the quiet alertness of a man who has been trained to turn concern into procedure. His hand hovered near the radio on his belt. Richard turned his chin slightly. A small shake. "Stand down." The hand fell away. The radio remained a dark square that did not speak. The boy braced, as if expecting the heavy first word that ends sudden joy. Richard felt the familiar sentence rise from the place where habit lives. He set his breath on it and kept it behind his teeth. "What is your name?" he asked, choosing a key rather than a hammer. The boy seemed surprised by the invitation to answer rather than apologize. "Cola," he said, not quite a whisper, not quite a claim, a word balanced between fact and hope. "Cola," Richard repeated, testing the shape of it. He looked at the boy's hands, open and empty. He looked at Amanda's hands, curled slightly over the armrests, not empty at all. "Sir," the boy said quickly, speed the reflex of someone often saved by it. "I did not come to take anything. I came to give something small. I can go now." Before Richard could answer, Amanda spoke. "Do not send him away," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the authority of a person whose need is not theoretical. The afternoon revised itself around that sentence. The hedge gathered a deeper shade. The stone kept its stored heat somewhere above. A small bird reconsidered a higher branch. The breeze adjusted its path through the leaves as if to make room to. Richard held the boy's gaze so the boy would know he was being seen, not scanned. "Why did you come in here?" he asked. He did not lace the question with suspicion. He let it be as simple as a door. Cola swallowed. He glanced at the gate, and at the place in the hedge where he had slipped through, and at the grass where he had rolled on purpose to make a child laugh. "I saw her," he said. "She looked sad. I thought if I danced, she might laugh. I came to give that. I can leave after." Honesty did not feel like style. It felt like muscle memory. Richard heard it and felt the precise moment when air becomes necessary to a diver. He turned to his daughter. "What do you want?" he asked. Though he already knew enough to be afraid of the answer's shape, Amanda did not blink. "I want him to stay here," she said, and lifted her chin toward the garden to clarify that here meant this open place, and not some safer, smaller idea of it. Richard looked at her shoes because sometimes the body speaks while the face misleads. He saw the right foot resting in its support, and then there it was, faint as a moth under linen, a shy ripple at the arch. He did not trust his eyes. He trusted them anyway. His own heartbeat missed and found itself again. He named it in the quiet ledger, where he filed the truths that would become actions. "A proof you cannot use yet," he told himself. "A piece of evidence too small to stand in the world, but strong enough to stand in you. You will carry it to the right room at the right hour and spend it where it will multiply, not where it will be wasted." He did not share the sight with anyone. He stored it like a match in dry paper. He faced the boy again. "All right," he said. "We will try a simple thing." Simple is strong. He paused to let the words collect weight. "These are the terms." The boy held still the way a stray holds still when a hand reaches out without a fist. Richard kept his tone even. "You do not go into the house," he said. "You stay in the open. You do what you did. You leave when I say we are finished. While you are here you ask for nothing. Do you understand these terms?" Cola nodded, a nod so eager it became its own small dance. "Yes, sir," he said, and the words were not bowed with fear so much as lifted by relief. Amanda made a sound between language and laughter. Her chest drew a breath with intention and held it. She turned her chair a little toward the lawn. The small casters scuffed a thin chalk of sound on stone. Habit curled its finger inside Richard's pocket. The part of him trained to turn feeling into payment reached for the checkbook of instinct. He stopped his own hand without moving it. Not a purchase. Not today. He would not buy what had just been given. He would define value without price, and by doing so, raise the stakes, from finance to ethic, from contract to covenant. "You do not take money today," he said. His voice had an edge he did not want, and he sanded it with a breath. "Later we will speak of other things. For now, only this." The boy swallowed something that might have been pride or hunger or both. "Yes, sir," he answered, quieter, like thanks tucked into a reply. Richard stepped a pace nearer and drew a line in the air with his words, not as a threat but as a frame. "You will use the gate, not the hedge," he said. "The gate is for entering properly. You will give your name to the guard. He will have it and he will be expecting you. The guard will open the gate. The guard will close it. You will leave by the same gate. That is the way in this house." The boy flicked a glance at the gap in the hedge, as if to nod farewell to an old accomplice. He looked back at the iron bars and understood. The hedge belonged to the world where chaos and luck make doors. The gate belonged to the world of rules. If he wanted to step from one into the other, it would cost something of his habit. He would pay with obedience and be paid with permission. Richard exhaled and made the final line an act of care rather than power. "You eat before you go," he said. The sentence surprised him even as he made it. It felt truer than anything he could have signed. It offered something his old life understood, a provision, while refusing the purchase his old life would have made. Cola's eyes shone, and then did not. The dignity of someone who has learned not to widen gratitude until it becomes an invitation to pity. "Yes, sir," he said, and this yes carried no apologizing at all. Amanda lifted her hands and made a silent clap. Rehearsal for the real ceremony. "Are we starting?" she asked, as if tomorrow had already arrived, and wanted proof that today would step aside properly. Cola searched Richard's face for permission. Richard gave him a single nod, the clean, thin nod of work found and accepted. "Begin," he said. The boy began, and the beginning was gentler than what had come before. He studied Amanda's face for a heartbeat and took the measure of her breath and of the balance between thrill and effort. Then he walked the imaginary guard line with palace solemnity and pulled a comic salute to the garden camera, accepting authority with mock gravity, before breaking it with a wobble that saved itself at the last possible moment. Amanda laughed, a smaller laugh at first, then a steadier one, the kind that makes the ribs do work and the face admit light. "Again," she said, and again. Richard stood with his hands empty at his sides and let the habit of inventory serve him rather than rule him. "Posture," he noted, a little more refusal of gravity. "Breath, arriving, shaping sound without scraping pain. Color, swift across the cheeks and settled rather than spent. The body learning a staircase with shallow risers." He did not look for the foot again. He let the small secret burn in his pocket. "Enough for today," he said at last, before eagerness could overreach and pay too high a price. "We stop while the hour is still kind." Amanda made a brief protest, and then nodded with the reluctant grace of a soldier who knows the parade belongs to discipline as well as flair. Cola stilled, fear flashing and then dissolving when he understood he was being paused, not dismissed. He looked at Amanda for confirmation. She shaped a solemn little okay with her mouth. He returned it, his grin carefully wrapped so as not to be loud in front of tenderness. Richard stepped close enough that the boy could feel the intention without mistaking it. He did not offer a handshake like a contract. He offered the steadiness of a rail no one else could see. The boy placed his fingers on Richard's hand, light as a leaf. The contact held one heartbeat and released. "You come back tomorrow," Richard said. "Same time, 4 o'clock. You arrive by the gate and speak your name. The guard will write the hour. You leave at 6 o'clock. He will write that too. You eat before you go. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Kola said. The phrase, now carrying the quiet pleasure of a task that belongs to him. "Tomorrow," Amanda repeated, trying the word as if it were a fruit she had chosen herself. Richard turned to the guard. The man stepped forward, because plans were now in the room, and plans were his language. "You will enter his name in your book," Richard said. "You will record the time he arrives and the time he leaves. You will note that entry is by the gate only. You will note that he eats before he goes. If there is any problem, you call me, otherwise you do nothing at all." The guard nodded, understanding that he had been given both instruction and trust. He glanced toward the hedge, and then at the iron bars, and then at the boy, who stood a little taller, because belonging had been named, even if only for 2 hours a day. The guard touched the radio without lifting it, a gesture that felt less like control than like witness. Kola backed away with a kind of formal clumsiness, bowing in that ridiculous courtly style he had invented for the day, then turned and walked toward the gate. He paused at the gap in the hedge, looked at it as if to thank a door that had existed when doors were scarce, and chose the latch and bars instead. The click of the gate was small and exact. The evening accepted it and kept moving. Silence came back, but it did not belong to grief. It belonged to order being gently placed atop miracle like a shade cloth over a delicate plant. Richard looked at his daughter. 4 o'clock, he said, as if naming the hour could build a place you could walk into. 4 o'clock, she said, and the house, which had missed the word tomorrow for too long, took the word and stored it like seed. They lingered without speaking. The marble column waited above in its cold certainty, an instrument of a life that would still have its uses. Richard felt no need of it now. He had chosen a different kind of brace, the kind that asks a man to keep his hands open and his eyes honest. He lifted 2 fingers toward the path where the guard stood. The gesture used to mean, "Stand down." Tonight it meant stand with. The guard touched his cap and turned toward the gatehouse. Richard gathered the match he was keeping for a later room, the tiny flicker under linen, a proof too tender to spend in daylight. He placed it beside another truth he was learning to respect, that not all value can be accounted for with ink and signature. Behind him the stone held its cold. Before him the lawn kept the warmth of footsteps and laughter. Between them he stood, choosing, and found that choice could be a place a man returns to every day at the same hour, a ritual that teaches a house to breathe again. By late afternoon the house had learned a new hour, and the air leaned toward the gate, as if the day itself paused to listen. In the garden the small red eye of the camera blinked its patient pulse, and the hedge kept its green, but surrendered its secret purpose. The iron gate took the work of welcome and stood ready to become an honest door. Richard stood at the balcony rail with the marble column to his left cold and waiting, and he felt less need of it than before. He watched the path not to command it but to witness it opening at the right time. He breathed, as a man breathes before a hearing, and let the garden answer for itself. Down at the gate, the guard prepared the desk, as if inspection might arrive without warning. He set the ledger flat and steady, and uncapped the stamp whose ink carried the faint mineral smell of long habit. He wrote the date in careful letters, and drew a space for arrival, and another for departure, and left a blank for notes, the kind of blank that could carry a whole life if asked. The minute before the hour brought its own quiet, Leaves trembled and held. Somewhere beyond the wall, a boat engine faded, and the first moth reconsidered the light. The guard looked at the page again, the way a man checks his tools to be sure responsibility will not slip through his fingers. Then the boy appeared from the lane, not by shrub or wall or any mischievous angle. He walked to the bars with a small frame squared by intention and stopped where a visitor stops. "Name," said the guard. And the boy answered with patience and ceremony, and said, "Cola." The guard nodded, and opened the gate not wide but wide enough to turn permission into a fact. The latch clicked and put a point at the end of the moment. They stepped to the desk, and the guard wrote the name with care, and set the hour of entering in words, and pressed the stamp to the page. The sound of the stamp rose soft and certain, and Richard felt something inside him organize around it. Order, but without the smothering weight he used to demand. A frame gently set around a picture that had chosen its own colors. Amanda had asked the nanny to place her chair where stone meets grass, where the little front wheels could bite the edge of earth. When the gate closed, she turned her whole face toward the path and then toward the lawn, as if the afternoon were a procession, and she knew her cue. The nanny waited far enough to be present without being heavy, and the air tasted like cut leaf and a thin thread of salt from the water beyond the wall. Cola walked the path like a red carpet he had not asked for and would not waste. At the lawn he did not begin until he looked up and found the nod he had learned to trust. Richard gave it a clean, small gesture like signing a document whose meaning had finally become clear. "Begin," the gesture said, and the boy began. He saluted the camera with mock gravity and paced an invisible guard line with palace solemnity. He bowed to Amanda with exaggerated courtliness, and she lifted her chin with the calm of a young queen, blessing a subject who made the kingdom worth having. Sound arrived, not as thunder, but as the polite, insistent knock of practice. Laugh, breath, small rest, laugh again. Richard let inventory serve rather than rule. Posture holding a faint, live thread across the shoulder blades, hands clapping with more point and less flutter. Color rising and settling without panic. Breath finding depth without scraping. He wrote in his phone few words that were nouns of progress. Laughter strong at 4:16. Sat taller without push. He kept the notes spare so they would scaffold rather than cage the truth. He did not write the secret he was guarding. He carried that match where wind could not find it. A proof he could not use, yet a quiet coin to be spent in the right room and hour. He did not look for the foot again. He let possibility be possibility until it chose to speak with witnesses present. Each day brought the same appointed hour, and yet each day differed enough to keep the heart awake. On the next afternoon, the sky wore a thin veil, and the light flattened across the lawn. Cola adapted with the ease of a creature from a rougher school, less rolling, more pantomime. He interviewed the garden bench with grave attention and argued with a flower pot about matters of state, and appointed it to office and fired it for corruption. Amanda laughed in little bursts that lengthened into lines, and when breath pressed sharp, she waited and found a wider breath. On the following afternoon, a small breeze started and failed, and started again like a hesitant bird. Cola bowed to it with respect, and when it refused the stage, he danced the refusal itself and made it comic. Amanda clapped out of time, then into time, and the clap sounded like clap and not tap, and the difference landed in Richard the way a diver finds a rung underwater. He saw again the staircase with shallow risers, and told himself to climb with breath, not leap with appetite. Culture began to bend. In the kitchen, a meal for 3 slid onto the list of ordinary without any announcement, and sometimes a setting for a 4th was laid and put away again, a future waiting in a stack. The gardeners learned to leave the far strip of grass untouched until after the hour, so the smell of fresh cut would not wrinkle a fragile chest. The nanny learned the exact moment to bring water, and the difference between stepping in and standing by. The guard performed his work with a private pride. He wrote arrival and departure, and pressed the stamp, and sometimes on the line for notes he wrote one quiet word: laughter. He closed the book with a click that had begun to sound like dignity. A day of rain arrived and pushed across the neighborhood, and folded the hedge and beaded the iron bars. The guard dried the desk and blotted the ink pad with devotion learned from his mother. No one stood at the lane when the hour neared, and the test of routine arrived with the water. Then Kola came sodden to the shoulders, and did not shake himself, but stood where a guest stands, and gathered his wet into himself, so he would not drip his welcome away. The guard opened the gate and gestured to the mat with the flourish. Do a minister, and Kola wiped his feet with care that converted damp to dignity. The stamp found the page, and the sound rose through hiss and drip and settled in Richard, like a permission he had not known to crave. Amanda decided the rain was mischief, and held out her hands for clapping, and then pulled the blanket from her lap and set it aside without a prompt. It was a small refusal to be protected against her will, and it felt larger than the sky brightening by degrees. Kola slipped once on purpose, and saved himself twice, and quarreled with a raindrop for filing late, before forgiving it with noble reluctance. Amanda laughed on schedule, despite the schedule being soaked, and Richard watched the camera blink its red eye like a clerk stamping time into memory. Calls came to Richard and rang unanswered, and he felt the old reflex reach for his spine, and he breathed through it and returned the calls after the hour, with a calm he did not have to fake. Power resets expectations when it chooses and does not apologize. He found that order could be gentle and still be order, and that this gentleness changed the room more than force ever had. By the end of the week, not counted in numbers, but in breaths and pages, the ledger held a small weight that paper sometimes earns when it has decided to carry a life with respect. Arrival at the appointed hour. Departure at the appointed hour. Notes mostly blank because truth did not need flourish. Yet the book felt heavier, and the guard set it in the drawer with a click he now loved, because it meant the day had been recorded and could not be argued away. Richard walked the steps and stood at the stone where rubber met grit and hope met habit, and he went down and let himself be seen by the hour he had chosen. Amanda reached for his hand, not for rescue but to confirm that joy had mass, and he gave his fingers steady and open. "Tomorrow," she said now, as a plan she owned. "Tomorrow," he answered, and the word did not frighten him. He lifted 2 fingers toward the shadow where the guard stood, and the gesture no longer meant only stand down. It meant stand with. It meant we will hold this hour together, and let its small law shape the house. He looked once toward the balcony where the marble waited in its beautiful cold, and he passed it without touching. He carried in his pocket the phrases that felt like clean scaffold. Laughter strong at 4:16, sat taller without push. He carried as well the match he had not yet struck, and he promised himself to strike it in a room that would honor its flame. The garden settled into evening, and the smells from the kitchen returned, and the walls seemed to hold a new noise printed into their paint. The camera rested, the hedge breathed, the gate stood easy after work well done. Richard turned toward the hallway where the pictures lived, and thought of the next room and the next witness. He would take the ledger in the language of the house and the spare notes in the language of the body. He would take the guard if needed, and the stamp if needed. and he would take the quiet inside him that now believed order could serve a miracle rather than smother it. Tomorrow he would drive his daughter to the place where white coats measure what fathers feel. He would keep the secret of the flicker under linen until a trusted hand could ask the right question and write the right line. He would speak briefly and let evidence carry the weight, for now he let the hour close on its own hinge. He let the gatekeeper lock the door with gentle hands. He let the house memorize the sound of the stamp. As a kind of music, he stood between the cold of stone and the warmth of the lawn, and understood that justice sometimes begins as a line written in a book, and a laugh recorded at the right minute, and a blanket set aside without a prompt. He breathed once more with the garden, and carried the day forward like a signed page in his pocket, ready for the clinic and its echo. Morning thinned as it climbed the hospital facade, and turned the windows into pale rectangles that only half admitted the day. The drive felt shorter than other mornings because Richard no longer bargained with chance or traffic. He counted quiet intentions instead, steps he could take when the doors opened, and the smell of antiseptic laid its cool order over the lobby. Air slid from vents with a dry whisper. The place offered the old bargain of institutions, comfort in exchange for obedience. He accepted the bargain on different terms now, not to conquer but to witness and to submit clean evidence. He had brought what mattered and left what did not. The guard's ledger remained in the gatehouse, a scripture of afternoons waiting for its own future courtroom. In his jacket he carried only his phone with a few spare notes, and the steadier breath he had learned to keep. Amanda rode beside him in her chair, hands loose on the armrests, eyes tracking the geometry of light on the tile, as if mapping a game no one else could see. The nanny walked half a pace behind, pushing only when asked, letting Amanda's chin choose each turn. At the desk, a nurse confirmed their slot with a practiced smile and a pen that clicked too loud against the counter. Fresh label paper warmed the air with a faint chemical thread. Richard recorded the detail without comment. He remembered other visits when he had tried to force the room to hurry with his name and his schedule. He had learned since then that institutions yield faster to quiet proof than to noise. They waited in a corridor, painted to pretend it was not a corridor. A sunflower photograph stared too yellow to be believed. A child across the way held a booklet without turning a page. The ceiling clock measured the space with an indifferent hand. Amanda rested her palm against the chair's side and told him without moving her mouth that she was all right. He answered in the same mute grammar that he knew. The doctor entered with the steadiness of someone who understands how much a doorway can change a face. He shook Richard's hand as if both men knew the limits and uses of gestures. Then he crouched to Amanda's eye level. "How are you feeling today?" Amanda said, "Fine." Quick and bright, the way children guard complicated truth. He did not press. He asked whether she would copy a little sequence with her fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4 became words in his voice and motions in his hands. She lifted her own hands. They did not obey perfectly. They obeyed enough to be counted. Richard watched the shallow staircase he carried in his mind move from theory to something that could be climbed. He did not speak. He did not volunteer the secret he had been guarding, the flicker at the arch of the right foot like a moth under linen. He wanted observation to arrive without being summoned by a father's hunger. Proof is stronger when the room finds it. The doctor moved through the ordinary exam with the care of a craftsman. He tested sensation along her calves with a soft brush, and then with dull pressure. He asked for descriptions of pressure rather than pain. He watched her face as closely as her legs. He asked her to push against his hand with a knee, and to hold a breath, and to count to the length of that breath without turning it into a contest. He did not say good. He did not say not good. He said thank you. And next, and take your time. Richard stood near the counter and watched the exchange and the air between them, where truth often hides. He kept his hands open because he had learned that open hands keep the room honest. He was not here to sell. He was here to submit the quiet progress he had collected at home. The doctor straightened and turned to him. "Whatever you are doing at home, keep the shape of it," he said. "Motivation is a medicine that does not come in bottles." He did not fish for a miracle report. He asked for specifics. What time of day does she seem most engaged? How long can she attend before fatigue asks for a pause? Which activities produce more posture and less slump? He was building a map from routine rather than from hope. Richard offered the nouns he had learned to trust. Laughter strong at 4:16. He said, sat taller without push, hands clap with sound. He did not spend the secret of the foot. He kept the match where wind could not find it. A proof you cannot use yet. A coin meant for the right room at the right hour. The doctor nodded, as if relieved that a father could speak the language of the clinic without surrendering the dignity of faith. He turned to the computer, typed what the record demanded, and then reached for the small printer on the shelf. Paper rumbled and slid into his hand with a faint heat still in it. He signed with a neat pen trace, a dot set exactly where it belonged. Then he lifted a stamp and brought it down to the lower margin. The sound was small and complete, like a lid closing properly. Ink left a clean rectangle that held the time in quiet authority. 10:40. Today, the line said, engagement back. Continue reinforcing motivation. The words were modest and formal, and they were better than a parade. They did not promise. They legalized what had begun. Richard felt the old part of him that loved paper lean forward, and he allowed it, but not to devour. He let the doctor pass the note to him, the way one man passes another, a fragile plate. He received it flat. The way evidence likes to be carried, he did not photograph it. He placed it in his wallet the way he once placed thin, green promises. And the weight felt more honest than cash. The room smelled of cationic soap and toner, and a trace of citrus from a cleaner used earlier. The light hummed as if the air itself were listening. The doctor wrote an order to adjust therapy to use the late afternoon window, and suggested 2 pieces of practice that looked like play. One would time a shoulder reach to a simple beat, one would turn exhaling into a measured ladder. Sometimes we see pathways wake that we do not know how to order on a form, he said. Then, a smaller line, almost a blessing. Keep the window. Amanda reached for the note not to read it, but to feel the paper. She traced the corner, as if to confirm that grown-ups had made something out of her work, then let it go. She was more interested in how the world moved than in what the world wrote about the movement. In the corridor, a trolley passed and spilled a ribbon of cold air and the clean suite of oranges. A window framed a still crane and a slice of sky that looked newly washed. Richard felt the document sitting in his wallet and did not check it. He had been given a small stone he could set on a table later, when other men mistook noise for truth. At the billing counter, he signed what needed signing without urging the line to part. He did not ask for priority. Process, not privilege. He thanked the receptionist and meant it. In the elevator, he watched the patient bulbs count down floors, as if the building breathed through them. Outside, under the portico, a gust lifted the corner of Amanda's jacket. She laughed at the trick and let the wind have its little victory. The chair bumped over the metal seam at the threshold, and the vibration traveled into her hands. She squeezed and released without prompting. The motion looked like nothing. It felt like a letter arriving a day early. In the car, she sat not higher in height but higher in intention. She asked to drive by the water, and he took the long way. Gladly. The sea wore a flat sheen like a polished plate. Kites held their lines with a labor. Their strings did not show. He thought of the folded note, and the folded secret, and of the bridge he had promised himself to build from one to the other, plank by plank. Back at the gate, the guard stepped out with his back straight, as if the morning had promoted him. Richard lowered his window and spoke courtesy that carried instruction. "At 4 o'clock you will record arrival as before," he said. "You will place a second notation for the first strong laugh. If you cannot judge, write the word laughter and the nearest minute. Do not wait for permission." The guard nodded without smiling, which told Richard he understood the difference between a favor and a duty. Inside, "Ordinary," resumed. Water ran. A pan found its ring on the range with a heavy sound. Amanda asked for the blanket, and then changed her mind and asked for the window. The nanny opened it and set a glass of water 2 inches from Amanda's right hand, because that was the distance she could travel today, without discouragement. Richard laid his wallet on the counter and placed the note where afternoon light could see it. He read the line again without saying it. "Engagement back. 10:40. The modest words and the stamped time stood there like an oath in plain clothes. He felt a rightness with no trumpet in it. Order would serve the miracle, not smother it. The soft thud of the stamp replayed in his ear and neatly arranged the room inside him. He did not send photos. He did not forward the note to anyone. He could list the friends who would drown it in sentiment and the colleagues who would strangle it with measurement. Silence, he decided, was the proper frame. He sent one text to the doctor. "Thank you." The reply came quick, a small thumb and 2 words. "Keep the window." At 3:30 he walked the hall, letting his fingers graze the wall, the way a boy drags a hand along a fence. The family photographs did not accuse him. He passed them without regret. 10 minutes before the hour, he took his place at the balcony. The camera blinked its patient pulse. The hedge breathed. The guard opened the drawer and set the ledger down and uncapped the stamp. Ink lifted a faint mineral scent and met the air like a memory. Exactly on the hour, the latch clicked. The boy entered as if punctuality had been his idea all along. Amanda turned toward the lawn and lifted her chin to the balcony. He nodded once. The hour found its shape, which was the shape of a room built by practice. When the laugh came at 16 past, the sound crossed the garden clean as a bell. Richard watched the guard lift his pen without looking away from the lawn and write the minute and press the stamp. The sound was soft and complete. It no longer resembled a penalty. It sounded like confirmation. The log had become a gentle court that recorded justice for a child who had waited too long for it. Richard touched the folded note through the fabric of his pocket and did not need to see it. Paper had done its first work. Breath and ritual would carry the rest. He allowed one thought to glance toward tomorrow without begging. The bridge was holding. He stayed until 6 when the guard wrote departure and closed the drawer with the click he had learned to love. He watched the boy accept a plate in the kitchen and eat with careful small bites, the way you eat when you know a meal can be made to last. He watched Amanda press her palms together at chest height for a heartbeat, and then rest them again, a gesture that looked like a prayer and felt like balance. Evening stretched its cool over tile and rug. The marble column stood where it always stood. Winter in all weather. Richard passed it without touching and went to his study. He placed the clinic note in the top drawer, under the leather blotter, like a foundation stone. He closed the drawer with a softness that satisfied the part of him that still wanted ceremony. He returned to the window over the garden and looked at nothing in particular while the air moved and the leaves found another shade of green. He thought of the camera's red blink and the stamp's small thud and the foot under linen, and felt a word that was not victory. It was closer to justice. which sometimes arrives as a time written down by a careful hand, and a doctor who will sign what he sees. Tomorrow would bring its own weather. He did not fear that systems like the clinic and systems like the house are built to receive the changing sky. He was learning to be one of those systems. He breathed in for 4 and out for 6, and let the late light draw its clean line across the floor. Then he went to find his daughter, because evidence is only as good as the life it protects, and the next plank of the bridge would be laid at the hour the house had learned to honor. By the next afternoon, the garden behaved like a place that remembers a promise. Heat shimmered without menace. The hedge breathed. The camera's red diode blinked a patient heartbeat, and then went still as if it knew when to watch and when to keep quiet. At the gatehouse, the ledger lay open on a fresh page, and the stamp waited beside the ink pad with the dignity of a tool that has learned its purpose. Richard stood at the balcony rail and let the hour gather him rather than the other way around. The clinic note rested folded in his wallet like a soft oath. He felt it square against his rib when he breathed. Amanda's chair was already at the seam where stone meets grass. No blanket today. Her fingers rested lightly on the rims. Cola crouched near a patch of clover, drawing a thin figure 8 in the soil with a twig, as if sketching a path for courage to travel. The guard stood straight by his desk. When the wall clock reached the hour, he wrote arrival in neat letters and brought the stamp down. The sound rose soft and complete through the heat, and felt to Richard less like rule and more like respect. Richard took the steps to the lawn. He did not want a balcony view of whatever would happen. He wanted the scale of breath and tendon and the grain of effort. Gravel ground under his soul. Cut grass sweetened the air. Somewhere in the shade, a sprinkler cooled and clicked itself quiet. Cola stood and brushed dust from his knees. He looked to Amanda first and then to Richard, only to confirm there would be no old interruption. Richard answered with a small nod that meant, begin when she says. Amanda glanced at the twig path, at Cola, at her father, her mouth turned up. Show me something harder, she said. The sentence wore the brave lightness of a dare given to a friend. Cola flicked a salute, a quick wrist, and mock severity that still managed to honor the room. Harder then, he said with the tone of a craftsman promising an honest cut. He warmed the air with the familiar pantomime that had opened the door weeks ago. Siren without accuracy. Palace Gardwa, an invisible line tripped and scolded. Amanda's claps arrived like small coins struck clean. The clap sounded like clap, not tap. Richard felt the difference, as if his own ribs had made it. Then Cola lowered himself into a squat in the grass and rose again in slow motion. Not a feat, but a lesson. He exaggerated the way the ankles complain and the knees wobble and the hips argue and then agree. He let the struggle be visible, so it could be shared. You try, he said to Amanda in a voice that pretended not to ask. His eyes set the invitation where her will could reach it. Amanda placed both hands on the rims of her chair and leaned forward until her arms trembled. Breath came in with a small sound, not pain, effort. Her shoulders rose and her elbows locked. The seat gave a hush of rubber against fabric. Then her hips lifted an inch, not the inch of measurement, the inch of defiance. The world in the garden held its breath. The guard froze with his pen above the ledger as if a wrong scratch might bruise the moment. Richard did not speak. He did not move. He let the action belong to the 2 children who had made it possible. Cola crouched close, his face bright and fierce with belief. 1, he whispered, counting like a metronome for courage. Amanda held. 2, he whispered again, the number landing like a step on a shallow stair. The third second stretched as if it had grown too proud and needed trimming. Hair slid over Amanda's forehead. Heat colored her cheeks with a shade the house had not held in a year. Her jaw set. The shake in her arms sharpened and then steadied. She lowered herself back, not as collapse but as choice, her breath arriving like a line crossing a finish chalked on grass. Cola's palms hit the ground in joy, and he bounced to his knees. "Champion," he said with a grin that refused to steal what it celebrated. He looked at her like teammates look at each other when the clock finally believes them. Amanda laughed once, sharp and new, and turned that laugh into a verdict. "Again," she said, "because victory without repetition is a rumor." Richard's body tried to answer with the old noise, a burst at the back of the throat, half laugh, half sob. He swallowed it. He shifted weight in his shoes and let the ground hold him up. He kept his hands open and his mouth shut. He understood that love sometimes means removing yourself from the frame so the picture can stay true. The guard looked to him for orders because habit lives in muscle. Richard answered with 2 fingers raised, the signal that used to mean stand down and now meant stand with. The guard bent to the ledger and wrote the minute. 4:16. He pressed the stamp. The small thud carried through the garden like a promise being notarized. No trumpet, only the honest punctuation of a fact agreeing to exist. Cola crouched again and set his palm flat, as if blessing the grass. "Next time," he told Amanda, "we hold for 5. Amanda nodded, breath still high in her chest, the number shining in her like a trophy. "You do not polish because you intend to use it." 5, she said, tasting the word like a new fruit. "That is enough for today," Richard said with a gentleness that did not take anything away. Amanda frowned, the brief protest of a commander who would like one more pass, then obeyed herself. She leaned back and let her breath settle on the stair the doctor had taught them to climb. In through the nose, out through the mouth, longer on the out. Her fingers tapped the armrest in a rhythm that sounded like a plan. Cola stayed beside her like a teammate after the whistle, present but not performing, letting the victory set without fingerprints. Richard placed a hand on the boy's shoulder for a second. "Not reward, not charity, acknowledgement only. Good work," he said, and the boy shook his head with a small smile. "It is her," he said. "I just tell the joke." Light thinned in the hedge and made a halo out of the smallest leaves. The camera gave one polite blink, as if to make sure the ledger would not have to testify alone. Richard glanced at the lens and allowed himself to be recorded in the correct proportion. Witness, not author. He touched the folded clinic note through his jacket. Engagement back. Continue reinforcing motivation. Modest words, with a stamped time that had already taught this hour to stand up straighter. The lines were better than a parade, because parades end and paper endures. "Keep the window," the doctor had said. The sentence read like philosophy and felt like a blueprint. The garden relaxed around the achievement. Jerseys of birds traded places on the fence. Somewhere a cart clinked over stone and then disappeared. Amanda sipped water and set the cup down by herself, 2 inches from where her hand had started at the beginning of the week. She looked up at her father. "Did you see, Dad?" He nodded once, the nod one gives a sworn statement. She smiled in a way that folded pride into promise. "I want to stand," she said. It came out not as a wish but as a mission. "We will make the room for that." Richard answered in his head and kept silence in his mouth so the sentence would be heavier when it was needed. He looked to the guard. The man had already lifted his pen, as if the new sentence lived on the notes line waiting for ink. The ledger closed at 6, with the click that had begun to sound like a chapel door. Inside the house, Amanda's eyelids dipped and rose, while the nanny wheeled her through the cooler air of the hallway. Cola carried the water glass and set it on the kitchen counter with the care people use for fragile instruments. Richard peeled away toward his study. He opened the drawer and laid the clinic note inside again, flat, under the leather blotter, where foundation things belong. He did not photograph it. He did not send it to anyone. He took out his phone and typed the spare line that systems respect. She stood, held 3, laughed. No distress. He saved it and locked the screen. The restraint felt like power properly aimed. For a long moment he stood at the window over the garden and let the evening align its instruments. The gatehouse lamp glowed. The camera nested in its housing like a courteous eye. The hedge made a soft noise like fabric being folded. The marble column stood in its winter, as it always would, a monument to a version of him he did not need to dismantle, to outgrow. He let it keep the cold for him. He chose the warm. He walked back to the kitchen. Amanda was awake again and negotiating tomorrow with the nanny. Cola had drawn another little circuit on a scrap of paper, a loop labeled with arrows, and the word 5 written like a crown. Richard watched their heads close over the plan and felt the good ache that comes when a house relearns its job. He stepped out once more to the balcony, because habit needed its own gentle ceremony. Air lifted and cooled the sweat at the base of his neck. He looked down at the path where shoes had left honest dust. He let the quiet say what it knew. The garden had stamped a fact and filed it under a child's name. The fact would be there in the morning, and so would the stair. He turned to go inside. Somewhere deep in the study, a phone came to life, the vibration far at first, and then closer as his mind reached for it. The sound came like a bee under glass. He crossed the hall and saw the screen brighten on the desk. A message banner slid into view without revealing its whole sentence. Only the sender, a partner who preferred pressure to patience, and a fragment that felt like the back edge of a blade. "We need to talk about optics," it began, and then the screen dimmed before finishing its threat. Richard stood with the clinic note sealed in the drawer, the ledger line still drying in the gatehouse, the word 5 sketched on a scrap by a boy who had learned to make joy do more than entertain. He let the phone buzz again once, twice, as if the world outside wished to be admitted without knocking. He did not open the message. He did not answer the door. He slid the phone face down and rested his palm on it, the way he had once rested a hand on the marble column. The new brace lived in different places now. He breathed in for 4 and out for 6, the way the doctor had ordered. He held the shape of the hour in his chest and felt it resist the pressure like a well-cut stone. Down the hall, Amanda laughed at something small. Cola answered in a whisper that carried pride. In the gatehouse, the ledger waited for tomorrow with its blank notes line ready to hold another minute. Richard lifted his hand from the phone and turned off the light. The house kept its new music in the walls. Outside, the camera blinked once and slept, as if the day itself had filed all it needed to keep the record honest for what was coming next. Morning slipped through the blinds and found Richard's phone already awake. Small banners gliding across the glass, with the smooth entitlement of people who mistake urgency for importance. He let them pass. Kettle hiss. Cup heat. The soft clatter of a house, remembering how to be a house. He stood by the window and watched silver light lay itself across the lawn. The hedge kept its dark at the roots. The gatehouse lamp blinked once and went still. He could feel, without touching, the clinic note under leather in his desk, like a cooled ember. He could feel the latest line in the guard's ledger, although he could not see it. He could hear again the stamp's small thud, no longer a penalty, now a confirmation. These had become his anchors. The marble column, beautiful and cold, had not. He opened the first message, the way a surgeon opens a sterile packet, slow and unimpressed. A partner wrote about optics and stewardship and reputational exposure, the words arranged like polished stones, meant to bruise by weight rather than force. A calendar invite slid in dressed as consideration, but carrying the angle of a blade, strategy at 8 that evening. Strategy again at 8 the next morning. In case the night alone could not bend a spine, he set the phone down and moved through warm tile and stainless hum toward the kitchen. Amanda rolled in with the nanny and claimed a pool of light at the table. No blanket. She asked for mango, and then insisted on peeling it herself, with the small knife she had been taught to use under a watchful eye. Her hands tried and tried again. Grip, adjust, slice. The whisper of skin parting barely audible over the vent's quiet breath. She lifted a slice in triumph. He did not clap. He nodded once, the way one nods to a sworn statement. Only then did he type a reply. "We will speak after 6 o'clock." He sent it as if sliding a paper across a table to a man who pretends not to understand short sentences. No apology, no story. At 4 o'clock this house is a chapel, and chapels do not reschedule. Mid-morning brightened and shouldered the day forward. In the study he opened the drawer and checked the cornerstone. The page did not glow. It did not promise. It held a line signed in a room that respects quiet proof. Engagement back. Continue reinforcing motivation. He liked again the modesty, better than a parade. Parades are for people who require noise to feel real. He laid a legal pad on the blotter and began a translation for himself. The non-negotiables written like a checklist for flight. The hour at 4 o'clock, the gate, not the hedge, arrival and departure recorded. First laugh noted by the guard's hand. A meal before the boy leaves. The 2 exercises from the white coat. Keep the window. He drew a square beside each, and ticked them as if the plane would not lift without them. The phone hummed once on the desk, a little animal wanting a hand. He did not give it one. He favored ink. He walked the garden with the groundsman at noon. They stood at the place where the gap in the hedge had been, and where order had taught leaves to knit. Richard touched that new weave lightly, not to test it, but to remember that once a child's joy had needed a hole in a wall to get through. The groundsman mentioned the ink pad failing at its edges. Richard approved a replacement with a small motion, pleased that a tiny tool had learned to be a symbol without becoming pompous. A junior aide called to confirm the evening meeting, as though salt would be saltier once named. Richard said yes, and rewrote the agenda in his mind. The subject would not be optics, it would be choice. At 3:30, he walked the corridor with his fingertips brushing the wall. Photographs of younger faces watched without judgment. In one he wore a suit like a trophy, and loved doors that flew open because he had knocked as if the hinges belonged to him. Now he loved a different power. The kind that did not knock because the room recognized right practice and made space. Down in the gatehouse, the guard lifted the ledger with the respect men reserve for clean tools. He set it on the desk and uncapped the stamp. The faint mineral scent rose, found the balcony, and met Richard's breath. The camera gave its patient blink. The hedge arranged itself in a small breeze-like cloth, deciding how to drape. Amanda settled at the seam of stone and grass. No blanket. The water glass sat a little farther than yesterday without comment. Cola appeared from the lane at the proper moment and stopped where visitors stop. He waited for permission with the dignity of someone who has learned that rules can open doors. Laughter came where it always came, clean as a bell at 16 past. And the guard wrote the minute without looking away from the lawn. The stamp went down, soft and complete. The sound arranged Richard inside himself. Order. Without the old smother, Amanda tried the lift again, not for distance but for steadiness, and made a tiny correction at the height of the effort, the sort of wisdom only repetition can teach. She held for 3, and did not reach for 4. She returned to the chair by will, not collapse. 5 soon, Cola whispered. 5. She answered, wearing the word like a crown she had outgrown and would fit again soon. When the hour ended, Richard descended so that his presence would be counted in the closing of the rite. He thanked the guard for the clean notes line and approved the new ink pad that day. He sent the boy to eat. He touched his daughter's hair once and said nothing, because silence can be shelter. By the time the ledger closed with its evening click, the study held a small mountain of messages. He climbed without apology. Night slid over glass and wood. Faces arranged themselves on the screen with the care that sits on top of impatience like a white cloth laid over a stain. They spoke in the vocabulary of risk and narrative and the duty to stakeholders. They said optics and reputational exposure until the words lost their edges and became the sound of a file dragged across a plate. They wondered aloud about a street boy inside a mansion, even by the gate, even under rules. They offered adjustments, soft names for removal. Perhaps the boy could be moved off property. Perhaps the hour could be shifted to darker times. Perhaps the laughter could be relocated indoors away from cameras and casual witnesses. Perhaps, each smaller stone tapping the same pane to see if it would crack. Richard listened and let the room spend its noise. He had once loved being first to speak. Tonight, he practiced a different muscle. He kept his palms on the rail, not on the marble column, and felt the difference. The rail held warmth and the possibility of motion. The column held winter and the illusion of safety. When the talking had eaten itself, he gave them a sentence built of work and truth. The window at 4 o'clock stays, he said. The gate stays, the log stays. The boy eats before he goes. If the story plays, it plays as truth, not as a press release. If you cannot stand with me on that, then you must decide what business you are in. He did not raise his voice. He did not offer them a villain. He handed them a fact. Silence followed and tried to look like thought. One partner cleared his throat and asked for time. Another proposed a follow-up at 8 in the morning. They named committees as if committees could change weather. He agreed to speak again because tides do not ask for consent and you build the wall anyway. He ended the call and let the screen go black. The house exhaled. In the distance, the refrigerator hummed its clean note. Somewhere metal eased as air cooled. In the gatehouse, a drawer slid, and the stamp settled square. Down the hall, Amanda laughed, and the boy answered softly on his way out. Good night, carrying the shape of a promise. He went to the balcony. Night draped the lawn. The hedge was one dark wave. The camera's red dot watched without intrusion. Like a heartbeat you suddenly notice when the room falls quiet. He placed both hands on the rail. The column waited in its winter for some other man. He thought of the partner's word, risk, and found the shape of the answer in 2 pictures. A paper in his drawer with a modest line, made heavy by a stamp, and the unguarded smile that had returned to his daughter's mouth at 4:16. He did not need to say her name to know why he would lose a contract rather than lose a window. It was not sacrifice. It was correct arithmetic. In the kitchen, the water glass rested a little farther than the day before, and no one moved it closer. That small distance was a sentence written in the body, a progress note stronger than any memo. The company could debate itself into a standstill. The house refused to stand still. He returned to the study and laid the clinic line and the gatehouse minutes side by side on the blotter. He added the spare notes on his phone, the nouns of progress, a system would respect. He would bring documents, not opinions. When the morning room tried to tilt the floor with talk, he would set paper on it until the bubble found center. He turned the phone face down and let his palm rest lightly on it. He breathed in for 4 and out for 6. The next meeting already crawled across the screen in a small ribbon. He did not read it. He spoke to the quiet instead. 24 hours. To accept in full, he said, not as threat but as weather. Then he closed the drawer on the paper, switched off the lamp, and left the room to hold his terms like a sealed envelope waiting for dawn. Evening settled with the calm of a hand-laying cloth. Heat left the stone by degrees. The hedge let go of its green smell as if it had been holding its breath all day. In the kitchen, a pan met the burner with a soft ring, and somewhere near the pantry, a small printer cleared its throat and went quiet again, its little heat folding into the air. The gatehouse lamp brightened, not with ceremony but with readiness. The house felt like a stage between scenes, every prop where it should be, every breath waiting for the next true line. Richard walked the corridor like a man crossing a chapel after the voices have faded. He did not straighten frames or correct shadows. He let his fingers find the paint and move on. On the balcony, the marble column waited in its winter for some other man's need. He passed it without a hand. The rail took his palms and gave back warmth, a modest exchange that felt like choosing a living instrument over a trophy. Amanda sat in the garden, face still bright from the hour that had ended. No blanket. Her water glass rested a little farther than yesterday, and no one drew it back. The nanny kept a quiet distance, the way a good guardian lets a new courage breathe. By the rear steps, the small green lamp held its circle and kept insects polite. Cola stood in that light, hair damp from the tap, clothes clean, in the way a hard life defines clean. The boy looked built of two forces at once, ready to run and determined to stay. Richard crossed the stone and sat beside him on the step. The house made its ordinary music around them. Plates touched and were set down. Water traveled a pipe like a whisper with purpose. From beyond the hedge, a single laugh from Amanda reached them and passed on. The sound of a bell that does not ask to be believed. He spoke in the language that had rebuilt his mornings, simple, exact, no extra shine. You will eat 3 meals a day, he said. You will sleep under this roof. You will use the gate, not the hedge. You will go to school when we place you, and we will place you. While you are here, you will ask for nothing until you need it. When you need it, you will say so, and someone will come. Cola stared at the stone between his shoes, as if it were telling him a story, and he needed both ears to hear it. His voice arrived small and straight. "Sir," he said, "are you sure?" Richard let the quiet answer first. The garden sent back the clean of leaf and a trace of soap from his daughter's hands. "I am sure," he said. He did not add why. He did not say the word daughter. He did not lift the clinic note like a banner or count investors or summon the vocabulary of risk. He held those weights behind his teeth and offered the plain result. The arithmetic lived in his chest. The boy deserved only the sum. In the kitchen, the printer woke again and spoke its short line. A thin strip of paper curled on the counter. The nanny tore it free and set it by the plates. Later, the kitchen would translate it for anyone who asked. 3 covers. A time in ink, not a poem. A fact. A receipt that could outlive a story. If a story tried to turn itself into wind, Richard set his hand on the boy's shoulder. Light and steady. Not reward. Not pity. A brace. "This is your home now," he said. He did not dress the sentence as a promise. He filed it as a report. Something had happened, and the language of the house would record it. The boy did not spend tears. He nodded once, then again, as if the nod needed to pass through a second door before it could sit. His fingers curled and uncurled against the step. A motion, like letting go of a ledge and discovering floor. Across the lawn, Amanda wheeled to the top of the shallow ramp and paused as if a stage manager had set a light for her. She pressed her palms together for one beat and let them fall. No prayer, no plea. The gesture carried the shape of blessing and the weight of decision. She did not call out, she had already heard. Richard rose and offered his palm to the boy in the same manner he had offered steadiness at the gate. "Come," he said, "there are terms, and they are good." Kola stood and followed. They went first to the gatehouse. The guard stood without stiffness, the pride of a craftsman at his bench. The ledger lay open. The new ink pad shone faintly at the edges where ink was young. Richard pointed to the top of the page. "Add a line," he said. "Resident guest. Name written clear. Arrival and departure as always. Note, first laugh at the appointed hour. If you cannot judge, write the nearest minute. Do not wait for me." The guard nodded. He reached for his pen and wrote with care, the sort of letters that stand at attention without showing off. He asked the boy his name, and wrote it as if the page were wood, and the tool a chisel. Back through the corridor, past frames that no longer pulled at him, into the kitchen where the receipt waited under the lamp. The nanny had set 3 plates at the table and left a 4th on the counter, a habit that had become a quiet, welcome mat for the future. Richard slid the receipt beneath the salt cellar, a small anchor, whispering to wood. The stew arrived with its honest heat, a slice of bread soaked and shone at the edge of each bowl. Amanda brought bread to her mouth without looking for a signal. Her eyes found Kola, testing the fit of a sentence. No one had spoken at the table, and everyone could read. Richard took the chair that let him see out through the open door. The hedge dimmed a shade at a time. He did not taste spices. He tasted steadiness. After a few mouthfuls, he lifted his glass and gave the only toast that mattered. "To the hour that holds," he said. Amanda set it back with a commander's gravity. "To the hour." The boy repeated it, shy and whole. When they finished, Richard walked Kola to a small room off the hall. The bed wore plain linen. A single chair held a folded towel. A narrow window faced the hedge, and, beyond that, a skein of water. No trophies to argue with. No history to trip. "Sleep here tonight," Richard said. "Tomorrow we speak about other things. For now, only this." Kola stood as a swimmer stands on the edge when the water is new. He did not cross himself. He set a palm on the bedspread and pressed lightly, as if confirming that the bed would return pressure when it should. He looked up with a question that did not require vocabulary. Richard answered with a nod, and left the room to learn a silence it had never held before. They returned to the garden. Amanda counted her slow breaths. The doctor's ladder built from air. 4 in, 6 out. She opened her eyes when their shoes found stone. "Are you staying?" she asked. "Yes," the boy said, and the word sat on the grass, as if it had been traveling a long time and could finally rest. Richard felt his phone stir in his pocket like a small insect under cloth. He did not take it out. The study would be lit by a screen that had opinions about optics and exposure, and doors shut to keep comfort safe. He let the thought ring and fade. He reached instead for the rail. The column remained winter. He let it be. The camera watched with its patient red. In the gatehouse, a man with a clean pen had already written a boy's name where it could be found. On the kitchen counter, the corner of the receipt peered from beneath the salt, a quiet hinge between choice and proof. He went to the study and opened the drawer. He placed the clinic line on the blotter and laid beside it a copy of the gatehouse minutes the guard had made on cardstock. Because a drawer that holds terms deserves stiff paper, he set his phone next to them with the notes already open. The nouns a system would respect. Laughter strong at the minute after the hour. Sat taller, without push. Held 3. No distress. He squared the stack with his palm, the way a mason squares a stone before the wall takes weight. He turned the phone face down, work complete for the night. Arguments could wait until morning. The lamp glazed the papers and made them look exactly like what they were. Not weapons, but instruments tuned and ready. From the kitchen came the contented clink of plates set to dry. From the corridor came the friendly hush of wheels going toward sleep. From the small room off the hall came a new kind of quiet. The quiet of a child not listening for harm. The house heard that quiet and tucked it into its beams. Richard stepped to the balcony one last time. Night had flattened the lawn into a single calm shade. The hedge lay like a dark shoulder. Air touched the back of his neck and cooled the day's heat. He put both hands on the rail and spoke not as plea but as report. The way he had learned the world receives what matters. "This is your home now," he said. The garden did not answer. It did not need to. The red diode blinked once and kept the minute. In the study, the phone woke again and slid a banner across glass. He let it ring and stop. He would answer with paper in the morning. Tonight, the house had filed something larger than a contract. A boy had been placed inside a promise. The margin where doubt liked to live had been stamped clean. He turned from the rail and crossed the room. On the counter, the water glass rested beyond yesterday's reach. He left it there. He switched off the last lamp. The ledger slept with a clear new line. The stamp cooled in its tray, and the house kept its new music. Not loud, not proud, only true. Ready to be played in a room where noise would try and fail to overrule proof. Morning arrived like a quiet verdict. The house arranged itself without being told. In the study, Richard set his tools the way a careful mason lays stone. On the left he placed the clinic note, a modest sentence signed in a neat hand, and stamped at 10:40, the ink now calm. Beside it he laid a clean copy of the gatehouse minutes on stiff card. The guard's letters even and exact. Arrival at 4 in the afternoon. First laughter at 16 past. Departure at 6. He added the kitchen receipt, the thin strip that once carried a breath of heat. 3 meals prepared and served. Time in ink. Last he set his phone screen up for a blink, then turned it face down, so the room would hear itself. From a drawer he took a plain metal drive and a clear evidence bag, plastic side in his hand. He copied the garden clip to the drive and waited without impatience for the small bar to complete its climb. He sealed the bag and wrote across the white strip with the same discipline he now asked of others. Camera West Garden. Day in words. Laughter at 16 past 4. He dated it in words and marked his initials small in the corner. Chain of custody begins. He did not love the phrase. He respected the work it did. He called the guard to witness. The man stood a little taller without turning it into swagger. His name went on the seal in a hand that believes names should stand upright in public. "Thank you," Richard said, and meant it. Witness is a meal for a person hungry for purpose. By late morning he walked into a room of glass and polish where money likes to hear itself. He could have hosted them under trees. He chose their table. Let the weather be theirs. Let the evidence be his. The elevator breathed cool and rose without complaint. The conference room waited with its long gleam, chairs aligned like a jury. A white screen stared, blank and sure of its power. Richard placed his papers not stacked, not scattered, but spread at human height. So eyes must look down and admit what hands could touch. Clinic note, minutes, receipt. He set the sealed drive beside the clinic note, as if placing a cup of water by a necessary pill. Last, he drew a narrow wallet from his jacket and laid a platinum card flat at the table's edge, not as a flourish, but as a wedge for a later sentence. Directors arrived in small groups, names that opened doors offering warmth polished by use. He answered each with the same tone he used for the guard, equal and exact. Faces filled squares along the far wall as remote seats found their little windows. Counsel tested a pen and made a single dot that meant readiness without drama. The chair smiled the way men smile when they are about to say that matters are simple. Optics. A director began, the syllables wearing the weight of a borrowed robe. Reputational exposure. Another added, as if reputation were a porcelain bowl and children a rough table. Questions of precedent. The room set the words down like heavy objects, hoping weight would pass for truth. Richard let the room spend its noise. When repetition revealed fear beneath polish, he rose. Not taller, only upright enough to move the light. He placed both palms on the rail of the table, not on the marble idea of himself he had once carried into such rooms. He spoke one clean line and let steel hide inside courtesy. We will start with record. He pressed the remote. The instant the sentence ended, and the screen woke to the garden, afternoon light moved through leaves like music remembered by a hall. Across the bottom, the timestamp lived in ink, not in his mouth. 4:16. The boy bowed with bright mock gravity. Amanda clapped, and the sound was the honest word clap. Laughter arrived, round and undeniable. Richard did not narrate. Evidence does not require a narrator when it breathes. He let the clip run to the second laugh, the one that lands like a verdict without a robe. Then he paused. Counsel adjusted her glasses the width of a breath and did not speak. A director looked down at the seam of the table as if the wood could rescue him from the sight of what was plain. Richard lifted the clinic note as a clerk lifts a file. Engagement back. He read, "Continue reinforcing motivation." Signed at 10:40. He set it down square. He slid the guard's minutes forward so the chair could see the column of time. The neat initials, the notes line that sometimes held a single word that weighed as much as a page. He laid the kitchen receipt where sight must pass. 3 meals, day in words, not a press release. A household's law made visible. We are not debating rumor, he said. We are reviewing record. He held the evidence bag without shaking it, because proof is not a rattle. The chain begins at this seal. The clip you saw is enclosed. Additional copies remain on the original system. If you require a copy for the company archive, the clerk will countersign and counsel may lodge it. The words "did the work" stamped paper does when puffed opinion pretends to be policy. A director tried again with the word optics, as if speaking it enough times would make the glass obey. A boy in a mansion, he said, "Cameras, neighbors, questions." Richard met his eyes and answered with the sentence he had written into himself over days of quiet practice. If the story plays, it plays as truth, not as theater. We will not hide care so that indifference may feel comfortable. The window at 4 stays, the gate stays, the log stays. The boy eats before he goes. If you cannot stand with me on that, you must decide what business you are in. Silence came and took the head of the table for a breath. And then another. Counsel, perhaps merciful, spoke in the language that turns rooms. If we receive the drive under seal and note it in minutes, she said, we accept that record exists whether or not we enjoy its color. She held the pen like a conductor holds a baton. Before asking for one clear tone, the clerk signed, counsel signed. The small stamp spoke a sound that felt like the faint echo of the gatehouse traveling across the city to stand in this chilled air. Richard reached for the narrow wallet and slid the platinum card onto the glass, not as bait but as mirror. I travel without announcing myself, he said. I will continue to. If your system only works when you recognize a name, it does not work. The card lay there, glamorous and useless, a little monument to the old way. and the sentence placed it into the past where it belonged. At the far end, one director tried a soft compromise. Could the practice be moved indoors? He asked, as if shadow would make truth polite. Richard did not smile. The garden is where the body performs best, he said. Sun, air, smell. You can see outcomes in the logs and read them in the clinic line. If you need to touch the receipt, you may visit my home and touch it. He left the invitation on the table for hands that respect paper. He pressed play again for a shorter measure. At the instant of the lift, the room shifted, as if someone had lengthened the table without warning. He stopped at 3 steady seconds and froze the frame. He did not say her name. He did not explain his heart. He pointed once to the bottom edge where small numbers keep faith, 16 past 4. Then he blacked the screen and sat, leaving only the papers that do not go away when light does. The chair performed a decision by adjusting his tie. We will need time to consider, he said. We will reconvene in the morning. Richard inclined his head. 24 hours to accept in full, he said. Not as a threat, but as weather. He did not gather the papers. He left them where they lay. A map anyone could read without a guide. A vice president cleared his throat, not to stall, but to own. He is the one who had listened with his shoulders. I will lead implementation, Thomas said. Standards, training, signage, community notes, archive intake, council coordination. The greeting changes today. He looked at the chair and then at council. Welcome aboard. If you notice anything that concerns you, please tell us. We listen. No one laughed at the plainness. The sentence landed like a new sign already screwed into real wood. Elevator down. Lobby air honest and clear. He did not call the house. He did not send a summary. He knew what the hour would do without him. At 4, the gate would click, and the ledger would open its day, and the stamp would speak its soft yes. The camera would blink. The hedge would organize its green. The boy would enter by the door, made legal by affection. His daughter would lift exactly as far as the day allowed, and place another stone on the bridge. He reached home before the hour because the hour does not wait for opinion. The guard rose and then remembered he no longer needed to stand for anything but the stamp and sat again with quiet pride. Richard took the balcony as a witness box. The red diode pulsed. The gate opened. The boy arrived like a man who trusts a door. Amanda raised her chin toward the rail and owned the lawn. Laughter arrived clean at 16 past. The pen moved. The stamp spoke its yes. She lifted for 3 and returned by choice. She laughed again and tapped the chair arm in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown shared between teammates. 5 soon, she said. 5 soon? He answered. He felt the boardroom air fall away and the garden's weather take his weight. He passed the marble without a hand and held the rail. This was the table that mattered. Here, chain of custody meant breath to breath, minute to minute, line to line. If the morning room needed show, he had show. If it needed stamp, he had stamp. If it required a drive in a sealed bag with names, the ledger of names had already begun. When the hour closed, he thanked the guard, sent the boy to eat, and looked at his daughter's face without the border of a screen. Then he returned to the study and left the papers square with the lamp where morning would find them. He rested his palm lightly on the face-down phone and felt the silence behave. He stepped again to the balcony. Night leaned its cool shoulder against the hedge. Somewhere, a siren passed without urgency. He spoke into air that had agreed to keep his terms. The work was not the drama. The work was the work. Morning did not wait for anyone to agree with it. It went to work and took the city with it. Richard dressed in the quiet of rooms that knew his pace and walked the corridor with the steady breath of a man who had already chosen what he would guard. In the study, the papers lay square with the lamp exactly where he had left them. The clinic line, the gatehouse minutes on stiff card, the kitchen receipt resting like a small oath. He touched none of them. He sent 2 words to Thomas and closed the phone. Proceed now. By late morning, counsel had guided him through a courthouse that smelled of paper and varnish and the faint clean of filtered air. The hallway held voices with respect. Doors opened and closed with the patience of institutions that have outlived personalities. In the gallery, Richard sat behind counsel and watched men and women who spend their days inside rules make ready to use them. The clerk aligned a stack of files. The reporter tested a key. The bailiff set a palm on the rail and looked at the room until the room remembered itself. The partner who had preferred pressure sat at the defense table, very straight and very still. His full name was spoken into the record. Sterling, a word that once sold polish and now sounded like a mirror you do not want to look into. He kept his jaw arranged and his hands quiet. On the screen to one side, the body camera file waited behind a pause icon, like a door that would open when the judge asked for it. Judge Martinez entered without ceremony and took a seat that needed none. Richard watched the way stillness formed around her and knew that she had learned how to make silence do the work that other people tried to force out of volume. Counsel rose and stated the issue in plain terms. Interference with a posted standard. Attempted removal of a minor by intimidation. Instruction to alter records without a written order. A thread sent to the wrong list and now preserved under seal. The chain of custody that followed. The judge listened and moved her pencil only when the clerk marked time. Then she lifted one hand a fraction, and the clerk called the case. The reporter looked ready. The judge said, "Play it." The clip began. The greeting at the gate in a voice trained to respect people, the placard, the ledger, the hand covering the book, the visitor fingers reaching, and the small tear that had named itself, the calm sentence about field integrity, the time on the screen in letters, not digits, the laugh at the garden, the minute written with a stamp that sounded softer than a gavel, and somehow heavier. When the image went still, the judge looked at Sterling for a long heartbeat, and then looked back at the file before her, as if reminding herself that no one sits above the paper. She spoke so evenly that the words landed like stones placed for a bridge. The practice of law is not a license to treat other people as furniture. The sentence found its place in the room and made its own light. Richard watched Sterling feel it without allowing his face to show it. Counsel for Sterling began to rise, with the careful preface that tired rooms know too well. The judge lifted a finger by the width of a breath, and the room obeyed the pause. Findings read quickly because the work had already been done in the hours when the system is quiet and honest. Violation of an adopted standard. Attempted interference with a recorded process. An instruction contrary to policy. The court recognized the harm of such conduct, not as spectacle, but as corrosion, and chose the remedy not as anger, but as repair. A suspension from duties that touch compliance, mandatory training in community relations and procedural integrity, 500 hours of community service to be completed with organizations that serve the populations you demean. The judge said it exactly like that. Populations you demeaned. The reporter typed the words. The clerk wrote the hours in letters so that no one could hide behind numerals. Counsel for Sterling tried again and offered a language of mitigation that the court has heard since courthouses were built. The judge let him finish and then answered without heat. The system did not blink, she said. It saw what was shown and recorded what was done and returns a remedy fit to repair. If there is an appeal, file it. If there is contrition, live it. She tapped the file once with the pencil. Record will travel farther than intention. Richard felt something inside him, a line not as triumph, but as relief that precision itself could be the punishment and the cure. He thought of the guard covering the ledger, and of the small tear sealed in a bag, and of the little thud of a stamp that had crossed a city to arrive as evidence. He did not look at Sterling. He looked at the seal on the file, and understood that seals are not decorations. They are doors that open only to the key called work. When the gavel touched the pad, and the case moved into the care of clerk, the sound was not loud. It did not need to be. The lines had been drawn, spoken, and written. Counsel beside Richard gathered nothing in haste. Dorothy placed one palm on the folder with a steadiness that looked like gratitude kept in its proper scale. As they stepped into the hall, Richard heard her say a single line to the team, in a voice that carried easily without effort. Family does not let the system blink. She did not enlarge the sentence by saying who she meant. She did not need to. Outside the building, the day had kept its honest light. He did not call the house because the hour knew how to stand without his hand. He rode in the back of a car that had learned the route until the gatehouse came into view, like a small desk in a church. The placard had already been repaired and remounted. The new edge shone where the lamination was young. The guard looked up and nodded once with the pride of a craftsman whose shop has been inspected and approved by the only authority that matters to tools, which is use. He stood on the balcony with the rail under his palms and watched the garden prepare itself, the way a stage breathes before a curtain lifts. The hedge organized its green. The camera blinked its patient red. Amanda rolled into her square between stone and grass. The guard opened the ledger to a clean line and set the stamp beside the pad at an angle he liked. At the hour, the gate clicked, and the boy entered as a person enters a door that knows his name. The greeting sounded as if a sign had learned to speak. "Welcome aboard. If you notice anything that concerns you, please tell us. We listen." Laughter came clean at the minute the system had learned to expect it. The pen moved, and the stamp agreed. Amanda leaned and held and breathed, and then chose to return. 4 seconds. And then a quiet smile that did not compare itself to anything. "5 soon," Cola whispered. "5 soon," she said, and it sounded like a promise made to a calendar rather than a wish tossed at weather. Richard left the balcony and went to the study not to arrange papers as trophies, but to make sure the path between evidence and action stayed clear. On the blotter he set a small square of paper that carried a courthouse time and a line in council script. "Auda interid. Suspension and community service recorded." He slid the sealed fragment of the placard beside it, not for drama, but because the story of a rip belongs beside the story of a repair, when you want a room to remember what it has learned. He stood there a moment and thought about how things would return. The ring had not yet come home. The paperwork for a release would come in due time, and the hour for that would be an hour with a stamp and a signature. It would return by signature and hour, not by gesture, and that was the only return he wanted. He closed the drawer with a soft certainty that felt like finishing a sentence he had been writing for months. Evening moved down the hedge with unhurried shoulders. The kitchen made its ordinary music. The small printer exhaled a strip for 3 plates and then went still. Amanda touched the frame of the doorway with her palm, the way a person checks a beam, not for fear but for fellowship. She looked at him with a question that did not need words. He gave her the nod that belongs to sworn statements. He had seen the court hold, and he had seen the garden hold. And so his answer held. He did not send messages to men who like to pretend that rooms can be turned by opinions. He opened his calendar and changed the shape of the coming week with nouns that do work without adjectives. Restitution, training, audit, review. He placed them at hours that made sense to the gate and to the clinic note and to mealtime. He turned the phone face down, not as defiance, but as completion. Before sleep, he went once more to the balcony. The marble column waited in its winter for some other man. He passed it without a hand and held the rail. Air touched the back of his neck like a cloth dipped in quiet water. He spoke into the dark, not to make a point, but to file a final line. The system did not blink. Family did not let it. The work would go on now without shouting. The house had learned its part, and the city had answered with words that mean what they say. Tomorrow the hour would come as it always comes, and a child would stand a breath closer to standing. Proof would travel with its own weight, and he would keep the window. Morning arrived without ceremony, and found the house already choosing duty over display. Cool air moved along the rail, polished the hedge to a patient green, and paused in the gatehouse, where the ledger lay like a small pond, ready to hold another clear reflection. The place woke the way practiced places wake, not to applause, to continuity. A kettle spoke its soft promise, a drawer closed square. Somewhere the small printer cleared its throat for later. Richard stood at the balcony rail and let the view take his weight. The marble column waited at his side with its old winter, a monument to a kind of power he no longer needed to touch. He did not touch it. He held the rail that had learned to answer his hand, a working thing, not a symbol. Inside the study, the desk did not perform importance. It held what mattered in the only way that lasts, the clinic note, stamped and sober. The gatehouse minutes on stiff card, letters steady as a heartbeat. The kitchen receipt that had begun as heat and settled into law. He took from an envelope the ring in its clear sleeve and set the packet beside the papers. He did not hoard these things, and he did not hide them. He made a file. He wrote a date in words on a small card and slid it into the folder the way a mason slides a keystone, not to bury meaning, to carry weight. He felt the difference in his palm. This was not storage. This was foundation. Dorothy came to the doorway and read the cover sheet without touching it. She did not speak the sentence she had already given the hallway. The one the building had accepted and echoed. Family does not let the system blink. She did not need to say it again. Her smile had the strength of someone who sees a bridge finished and trusts what holds it. She left him with papers and ring and the quiet that follows a promise, kept the right way. The house kept the ritual it had earned. In the gatehouse, the guard arrived early, not to impress, to respect the hour. He squared the desk, set the stamp beside the ink pad at the angle he liked, and opened the ledger to a page that waited without anxiety. The laminated sign that had once been ripped now lay smooth and firm, drilled to wood, not as threat, as welcome. The body camera woke and wore its small green with calm. Amanda rolled to the seam of stone and grass, with the assurance of a person who can read a room by light and breeze and the sound the earth makes when you ask it to hold you. No blanket. The water glass stood where she had started to prefer it. A hand's reach farther than before. She placed her palms on the armrests, not to lift yet, to let her body remember that hands decide. Kola entered by the gate like a boy who had built himself a stage out of repetition and joy. He bowed with bright gravity and looked to her first. She nodded. That was their contract. Laughter arrived on time, round and clean and free of apology. The guard wrote a minute in words and brought the stamp down with a sound that now seemed to travel farther, as if the city had turned into a chamber tuned for that note. Amanda lifted and held. 2, then 3, then 4. Not every day climbed. Some days polished. On a certain day when the air was kind, she reached for 5 and found it without wobble, and then returned by choice. Her smile did not ask for admiration. It accepted the count as a truth to keep. Richard did not clap. He practiced the kind of fathering that is mostly witness. He watched the small changes take their places like documents signed by muscle. He learned to choose correct expectation over large hope, and felt the relief in that exchange. He moved meetings not by title but by map, placing the window where the house could breathe and arranging the rest around what mattered. He had learned that schedules can be moral. In the afternoon, a courier in a plain jacket came to the gatehouse with an envelope that carried a seal made for use, not for decoration. The guard checked the exterior against a list and wrote the time in letters on a line that does not know how to lie. He walked the envelope into the study with the pride of a craftsman carrying another person's proof. Richard received it without surprise, because he had stopped being surprised by the way work returns its wages. He opened the envelope without flourish, and let the resistance of the seal turn into permission under his thumb. Inside lay a clerk's line, and the calm authority of a stamp that agreed with a signature. The ring had come home the way it should come home, not as sentiment, as record. He placed the packet beside the clinic note, the minutes, the receipt, and felt the desk deepen under them as a pier deepens when you set one more true stone. He did not build a shrine. He made a system. Evening leaned its shoulder against the hedge. The kitchen settled into its sturdy music. The small printer released a narrow strip that promised 3 plates, and then went quiet. Bread and stew kept their old loyalty. The guard, off duty now, walked past the desk and left the lamp in the window at an angle he liked. The way a woodworker leaves a finished table and touches its edge once with an open hand. Amanda touched the doorframe with her palm as she passed, and set her hand a measure higher than last week, not by ceremony, by habit. Kola carried a bowl with both hands, because he had learned to treat what feeds you like a tool, not a trick. They ate under the tree that had learned their names. They did not hurry. When she finished, Amanda rested, and then returned to the seam of stone and grass, and lifted again for the joy of repeating a line the body now trusted. Richard opened the drawer after supper and slid the ring packet more firmly into its place. He checked the card he had written and added a phrase in neat letters, so that years from now a tired version of himself would know exactly when this quiet miracle had been made public by paper. He turned his phone face down, not as defiance, as completion. Then he opened the calendar and set the next week with nouns that do work without adjectives. Restitution, training, audit, review. He placed them at hours that would not lean against the window. He had learned to protect what protects. He stepped back to the balcony. Night gathered itself without hurry. The hedge merged into one kind shape. The path drew a soft line for feet that knew it well. From the small room off the hall came the sound of a boy, turning once and settling like a boat in a harbor. It now trusts. From farther down the corridor came the measured breath of a child who had taught the house a better rhythm. The gatehouse lamp hummed and cooled. He looked toward the study where the ring lay under light, ordinary as a coin, and earned the way coins should be earned. He looked over the lawn where a chair and a boy and a sign on a desk had arranged themselves into a community that did not need to advertise itself. He looked up at the camera that did not intrude, and down toward the ledger that would be ready again tomorrow. He did not think of victory. He thought of keeping the hour, keeping the window, keeping the line between theater and truth. He kept the rail. He had learned to speak to the quiet as if it were a clerk. No flourish, just what the file required. He said the sentence that closes a day without closing a door. "We will keep the window," the house answered in its way. A lamp clicked off. The small red diode blinked once and rested. In the gatehouse, the stamp cooled in its tray. In the kitchen, the receipt slept beneath the salt. In the drawer, A ring waited for its next lawful moment on a finger, not as a flourish, as a fact. He closed his eyes for a breath, and opened them to the garden that had learned to hold him right. He did not feel young, he felt correct. The day had folded itself, and the city had agreed, and tomorrow would arrive asking for no songs, only the truth repeated on time. He turned from the rail, and let the dark keep what had been filed. Justice signs in cold ink. At its heart, this story reminds us that justice does not always roar. It often arrives quietly, through small acts of courage, compassion, and consistency. Richard's journey teaches that healing, whether personal, familial, or societal, cannot be bought or forced. It must be built, piece by piece, through honest work and the willingness to listen. The marble column, once a symbol of control, becomes a relic of ego. The ledger, once routine, becomes a record of grace. What saves Richard, his daughter, and even those who wronged them, is not wealth or status, but the slow discipline of doing what is right, even when no one applauds. In a world that often rewards noise and punishes vulnerability, this story asks us to trust in quiet integrity, the kind that rebuilds trust after betrayal and light after silence. It reminds us that true gold fears no fire, that the worth of a person or a principle is proven not in prosperity, but in pressure. Each time we choose fairness over pride, empathy over appearance, we repair a small part of the world around us and within us. If this story touched you, take a moment to share what it stirred in you. Have you ever witnessed kindness that changed someone's life, or your own? Tell us in the comments. Like this video if you believe in justice with a human face, and subscribe for more cinematic stories that blend truth, heart, and reflection. Wherever you are tonight, may you rest knowing that decency still counts, silence can heal, and every act of integrity is a quiet kind of victory. Stay gentle, stay steady, and keep the window open for light.